Guys, welcome to the last or next to last piece of the lecture module. So you're almost finished with module number 3. And we're just going to go through in this section and talk more detail about the power of an SDS. We keep talking about it. It keeps showing up. So we think it's very important, and your employers in the future will think that it's very important for you to understand the purpose and what you can find in the SDS forms. Okay? So as usual, we always start off with an incident, right? So here's the incident that we're getting ready to talk about. And it says a student working in a laboratory needed a chemical for an experiment. While looking for the chemical, he came across a bottle of isopropyl ether. He remembered that isopropyl ether was well known for explosions from peroxide formation. Now I want to stop here for just a second, because clearly the incident describes a student who's done their homework, right? So they know what they're going to be using, isopropyl ether. This student probably went and looked up isopropyl ether and maybe found the SDS sheet for it. And in the SDS sheet, or another resource, they discovered that ethers, and isopropyl ether is no exception, loves to make peroxides. So they were fully aware of what was at risk as they went into the laboratory to use this chemical. Otherwise, they wouldn't have known this information, right? As he looked at it, it appeared to be filled with large crystals, and he knew that it should be a liquid, not a solid. All right, well, here again, he knew that it was a liquid. If he's never, or she has never, used this material before, or this chemical before, the SDS sheet would have relayed this information to the reader. They would have automatically figured out that this stuff was supposed to be a liquid. The SDS sheet would have told them that this is explosive under certain conditions, and the explosiveness is coming from peroxides. And this is traditionally what we would see with ethers. He reported this to his professor, who came to look at the bottle too. And the professor ordered everyone out of the stockroom and called local emergency response officials, who sent out the bomb squad. Well, they probably did this. This emergency response team probably have never worked with ether, at least commonly. This could have been new to them. But again, they sent out the bomb squad. And part of the reason is they could have looked at the SDS sheet, just like the SDS sheet told them that it was a liquid, and just like the SDS sheet warned them about the peroxides, and just like the SDS sheet warned them about the explosiveness. So they sent out a bomb squad, and the bomb squad removed the bottle for controlled detonation in an open field. So first off, if you don't get it by now, there's quite a bit of information in the SDS. Now, I know that we went through many videos, and we discussed that SDS sheets are not legal documents. And we also said that SDS sheets can sometimes be inaccurate. You're going to find wrong information in them. But the basics and the major things that are issues with chemicals in a laboratory are probably going to be correct in the SDS sheet itself. All right. But there's still going to be things that we're going to watch out for that doesn't really make any sense at all. Okay. That's just the nature of the beast. That's how it is. So here's the incident. We find a professor or an instructor that knew exactly what to do. They went through the proper emergency response route. We had a student that knew that something was wrong. It didn't quite match what maybe they had read about or studied before coming into the laboratory. Something was off. It was a solid. It wasn't a liquid. There was issues with ethers, explosiveness. That's just very common when we work with ethers. And we have ethers in our laboratory. What happens is that these crystals, as they solidify, little fractions of unscrewing the cap, or friction, I guess, of unscrewing the cap, is enough energy to get them to explode and blow up on us. And if that explodes and blows up, then the entire bottle will explode and blow up as well, and create an even worse situation than what just the crystals would have done. So everyone did what they were supposed to do, but bottom line, this information could have easily been found in an SDS sheet that you should be looking at and that you should become familiar with. So we want to pay closer attention to these sheets, and I just really want to reaffirm a couple of things that we've already talked about, so that way you get a very comfortable feeling that you know what the purpose of these sheets are for, and you know who basically started these sheets back in the day. So SDS is what they go by now, and once again that stands for a safety data sheet. Again, they used to be called MSDS, but no longer do we put the material or the M in front of the name. So safety data sheets are a requirement. It's not something that you just are recommended to have. You have to have them. And even in academic environments, we have to have them. And it's just not laboratory people. If I was working in maybe the dental department at a college, if I was working with the custodial staff in the college, anything that has a chemical that's associated with it needs to have an SDS on file in their teaching spaces or in their laboratory spaces at all times. So for instance, if I was in the welding program and I would have acetylene gas to create those welding torches, I would need an SDS folder, and in that folder would be an SDS for acetylene gas that they are using. And if that's the only thing that they have, that's still a requirement. You should have an SDS on file with any kind of weird type of chemical that you might have in your space, no matter what type of program that you're coming from. So this is a requirement. Well, who requires it? We said before in the past, it is OSHA. The Occupational Safety Board has basically determined that all spaces, if they have any type of cleaning chemical, any type of laboratory chemical, anything that's kind of weird and strange, that you should have an SDS sheet for those and available to your workers and to your employees. Specifically, it's the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard. Now, we've also talked about this before in the past, and we abbreviate this to HAZCOM. Sometimes you'll see one M, and sometimes you'll see two M's at the end of that name. So all suppliers are required to provide these when you purchase a chemical from them. So it's really left up to the supplier to initiate this kind of chain or chain of command in a way. So the supplier will be the seller and you are the buyer. The seller provides the SDS sheets. They have to make sure that they send the SDS sheets to the buyer, and then the buyer has to make sure that they file these SDS sheets in the proper way. Something that we've also talked about in the past is that SDS is really for industry. We're talking about large scale. We're talking about tons of chemical, not just a little bit that you might find in a working research laboratory or even a wet chemistry laboratory for some type of employer. These are really meant for industrial scale, large volumes, large vats of chemicals, large quantities. That's really how they're geared. That's how they're written. And sometimes us, in our point of perspective, would read an SDS sheet and we would say, well, that's strange. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't really happen in our lab. Why are they telling me to do that? And the reason, again, is because it's industrial scale. It's not really meant for a laboratory that you might work in when you graduate from our program. Okay. As far as the MSDSs go, they did not. Okay, they did not have any type of legal requirement. They only had recommended ones. Okay, so very early on, we did not want to force people to do certain things. We just gave them recommendations, and many of them did follow those recommendations. They didn't have to, but many of them did. Now with the move toward GHS, the GHS is involved in the SDS new format for these documents, and the GHS does require these companies to follow the requirements outlined in the SDS form. So if you want to be part of GHS, if you want to be part of this global organization, you have to do what they say. And these are now requirements. They are no longer recommended ones. The requirements, they have partnered with ANSI, ANSI, and that stands, again, because we've seen this before, the American National Standard Institute. So they are the people that basically came around and said, this is what we think is relevant. This is what we think you have to have in the SDS sheets for these employers and for these entry-level workers and students and teachers and everyone under the roof that works with this type of chemical. Now, with that said, with all of the requirements that are put onto the system, with all of the organizations that are involved and put their hands on the SDS system, you have to understand that SDSs can be inaccurate. We've talked about that before. They can be misleading, and they can be incomplete. It's not surprising if you find an issue or an error with any one of these, okay? They're not perfect documents. They were never really meant to be perfect documents. It is a general document for the general person and the general reader to kind of figure out a little bit more about what you're working with in your work environment or in your academic environment. That's really all that they were set out to do. Okay, they're not going to be specifics. If you want specifics, we've already talked about other resources that you need to be using in the previous section of the lecture module that you need to go to that will provide you more detail, that maybe will be more relevant to what you need as a worker than the SDS form. Okay? So that's where I'm going to stop this video. In the next video, we'll continue on with our discussion of the SDS, and we'll start talking about why people didn't really trust it and really currently don't even trust them, and the issues that we have seen in the past, and maybe the steps toward fixing some of these problems. So that's what we'll discuss in the next video. You know, I've only kept you for about 12 minutes with this one. Why don't you come back, pick up on the second video automatically, and just keep trucking on, right? The faster you get these done, the faster you'll get the modules done, and the more free time that you'll have in the future and later on in the weeks.